Welcome back. I'm Max Columbus, and this is day 2 of the Washington Journalism and Media Conference held at George Mason University. We got to wake up and eat breakfast, chat amongst ourselves before splitting off into color groups to discuss the First Amendment. And within our discussions, we were talking about student journalism and how students in high school are not protected by the First Amendment. You are in college, but there's this thing called the New Voices Law, which in many states it's there, and in many there isn't. So, as someone who's written a few political pieces, knowing I'm not protected by the law, because I've written some of them in my school publication, is a little nerve-wracking. I'm not nervous too much in the aspect of what will happen to me, but it's the things you think about. What if someone else did it? Something different, but actually it became a problem. We're lucky that it's not censored at our school in West Bloomfield, but it's a concern. So I actually can hope that I'll be able to talk to legislators about making the New Voices Law there in Michigan. And during this time, we also did a simulation where a first year English teacher reported a longtime advanced placement English teacher to the principal for changing AP English scores. And it was pretty easy to do according to this teacher, and she was near retirement and kept getting more bonuses for passing grades. So there was a decision that had to be made of, does she get told she has to retire by the end of the year, or can she continue teaching for those 3 years? So we split off into roles of community members, reporters, being an attorney, student sources, the newspaper editor, the assistant editor, to strategize for about 20 minutes in separate groups about what we would do. My role specifically as a community member was a small business owner across the street, and I was having a lot of theft. And within my store, students would come during lunch or after school, but I'm not a component of believing that students should have a voice in this, and that the adults should be making the decisions. So I decided to go on the argument about transparency is important and it brings people in. When you're not honest as an administration when this happens, that's how you lose people, and people are already being pushed out. But it was also interesting after the simulation concluded that we discussed that it was hard for us as characters because we all believed that that article the students wrote should have been published and not censored only because it was active litigation. We thought that it should have been published, but because you're in a role, that it was hard to stick in that. So I thought that was pretty interesting, and from what I've heard, it has been different from other color groups. But one thing the First Amendment does not allow, or a few things, are fighting words, obscenity, inappropriate behavior, crimes involving speech, threats, violation of copyright. So interesting to hear that you're not protected after those things occur. And then we got to hear from speakers like Colonel Ali Weisskopf, who's a director of Pentagon press operations at the Department of Defense, or right now known as War, where she talks about how she got to where she is. She applied for the military to get finances so that she could attend college. Ended up loving the military, where she decided to stay for 22 plus years, and she's still there. How she balances her role, but also talking about transparency and how being a source is important, and just having the relationships. You may not be able to give everything or verify everything, but it's an important thing. And then we got to speak to freelance photojournalist Anna Layden, who was talking about the definition and perception of a photo. That sometimes we see a photo, it's really simple to us. I personally believe there's no bad photo, you just learn as you do the photo. You may take a worse photo in the beginning and get better by the end, but she talks about how she views photojournalism, and with AI coming on, where she stands with that. You won't know where you'll be in the coming years, but that your goals are achievable and that your photos are very important. And sometimes words aren't enough, and she's been on many of protest covering them as a photojournalist. And one thing that really stuck out, and I'll write about all of this at the end, is the intersection with art and politics is Anna's definition of photojournalism. Quite an interesting thing. Well, then we got to go on a monument tour in Washington. We didn't get to see the Vietnam Memorial or the Korean War Memorial or World War II. It's really nice to go, and we got a picture in front of the Capitol. Well, that was day 2. Stay tuned for more. Day 3's coming up tomorrow. We'll see you then.